The loudest, the biggest, the brashest. New York is its own character in every play.
The bad thing about New York is the pressure. You're always under pressure.
Here are the stories about those plays. It's New York Accent with Damon Amendolara.
Welcome back to New York Accent, everybody. The podcast about all these great sports events and athletes and sports figures that have happened here in New York and also shared around the country via CBS Sports Radio as well. Our next guest is the architect of the last Stanley Cup champion New York Rangers team. And with the Rangers playoff run in the air, we thought it would be the perfect guest to dial in on some of those great moments from the 1993-1994 season. Former Rangers general manager Neil Smith joins us here on New York Accent. Neil, how you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing tremendous. Thank you so much for joining us. And how does it feel to know that you could still walk into Madison Square Garden all these years later and likely get a standing ovation on the Jumbotron?
Yeah, if they see me, and the new garden isn't as easy to spot you in as the old garden when they had the roundabout going around the inside of the garden. You know, when I go back there, everybody would see you because you had to walk around to get to your section. Now you sort of walk around inside the building and more incognito, but I'm very proud of what we did in New York, and proud of the fact that that building has been there since 1968 and has only seen one Stanley Cup won by the Rangers, and that was the one in '94. And not to mention that it's the Rangers themselves, as you might know, Damon, have never won the Stanley Cup in New York. In their four Stanley Cups, the only one won actually in New York was ours in '94.
If you can put your body back inside the garden during some of those playoff runs, and specifically 1994, can you reflect and remember that electricity, that intensity, that energy that MSG was filled with during those playoff games?
Oh, I can, very much so. And you know, the other thing is that on off nights, it was filled with that same electricity for the Knicks, because the Knicks were going right down to Game 7 eventually against Houston. But there was an excitement in the air that could this be the year? Because, I mean, basically from the get-go that season in '93, we'd been on top of the league. We really were a favorite all year the way the team was playing. And so when it came to playoff time, you know, there was a real buzz going on in all of New York, and especially obviously in the Garden on the nights of the games. And when we started off the playoffs with the 2-6-0 wins over the Islanders, back-to-back 6-0 wins, I think the Garden faithful was ecstatic.
Your tenure in New York with the Rangers begins in 1989, and quickly 2 years later, you swing perhaps the biggest trade in franchise history by acquiring Mark Messier for what would end up being 4 players. It gives you the cornerstone of that franchise. How did that trade come about, and had you circled Mark Messier years before when you had first taken over the franchise?
Well, the answer to the second question is no, because I didn't know that he'd ever be available. You know, at that time, when I got there, Gretzky had been traded a year earlier. I believe it was '88 when he was traded, I believe. And so, but I never thought of Edmonton trading Mess. And then when Glenn called me about it, you know, Glenn had quite a reputation in those days of a horse dealer, and you weren't sure whether he was serious or not. I mean, I was only in, as you said, I was only in my third season, or going into my third season when that trade possibility came about. And an interesting part about that, Damon, is that we were talking about it for quite a while, and then I signed Adam Graves as a Group 1 free agent out from under Sather in the summer, and he was really furious with me for doing that, and said, you know, he told some of the writers that, you know, maybe I didn't even want Mark, maybe I was, you know, this could blow up any chance of getting Mark. And so I said I don't know if I have any chance to get him or not. I don't know if this is real, but I do know that Graves was real. and I could do that. So I did it. And as history says, we still were able to pull together the Messier trade.
Did you worry when you signed Adam Graves that it could rattle the cages in Edmonton enough to lose out on Messier?
I did, but you got to understand, I wasn't sure that he would really trade Messier, and I didn't know what he was trying to do. The other thing that's hard to believe in 2023 is that there was a lot of people there. He had said publicly, Glenn had said that there were no other teams really that were showing an interest except for me. And he gave me a lot of credit for having the guts to go and try to make that trade. Others just backed away from it. And you have to remember that in those days, that Edmonton had played so much hockey, and Messier in particular had played so much with Canada Cups and going to the finals so many times in playoffs. He'd gotten hurt in the playoffs the year before against Minnesota. People thought maybe, that he was almost done, and that's why the Edmonton wanted to trade him and get what they could. There was even an article written by Walt McPeak in the Newark Star Ledger that he said he bashed the trade, saying, here we go again with the Rangers trading young guys for old has-beens. And so it wasn't as obvious a trade then as it is now. In the rearview mirror, people must think, well, Smith had Messier fall in his lap, but that's really not the case. I had to work to make that trade, and I had to pray that he would be the player that he turned out to be.
Well, it ends up being the hugest deal in franchise history and certainly of your career as well. And you begin adding Oilers from those dynasty teams at Edmonton in the 80s. You've added Kevin Lowe, you said Graves, Esa Tikkanen as well. And so now you've got this nucleus of guys that have played together. Was that a Messier idea to go after some of those former Oilers teammates, or was that your idea because you liked what they brought in terms of that championship experience?
Well, you know what? My philosophy had been since being with the Islanders in the early 80s, that in order to have a chance to win, you better get people in that have won before because they know how to do it. And when I say know how to do it, I knew that if we could get people that had won the cup in the past, we might have a chance to win it. Now, Messier was obviously the biggest piece of that. He was not involved at all in the, any of the acquisitions. Mess was there for 2 years before the Stanley Cup year. And actually, the year before the Stanley Cup, we missed the playoffs through some unfortunate injuries to Brian Leetch, and Mess had some hurt injuries in that. Roger was fired, and that year didn't turn out very well. But during that season, I acquired Esa Tikkanen, coming up. And then I also acquired Kevin Lowe that year. So they were both on that non-playoff team as well. And we had Jeff Bukaboom came sort of with Mark in that initial trade. So we had quite a few. And then, McTavish came at the deadline right before. So, yeah, we had a lot of guys, and so did Glenn Anderson. Sorry. So we had a lot of guys who had played on a Stanley Cup team together in Edmonton. And, to add one other thing, to win a Stanley Cup, you've got to have both skill and hard work from the manager and from the coaching staff, but you've also got to have some luck. And I was lucky that era was the era where, the Edmonton Oilers were trying to go younger, and they didn't want to pay big salaries, and the big salaries were all coming. And who gets the big salaries? Well, the Stanley Cup winners get the big salaries. So they were dispensing a lot of their Stanley Cup guys in order not to have to pay this big US dollars in Edmonton, Alberta.
You had just mentioned Roger. Roger Nielsen was the head coach before the championship season. You then hire Mike Keenan to run the 93-94 team. Did you fire Roger because you knew Keenan was available, or did you know you had to make a change no matter what? And how did Mike Keenan become the guy?
Well, we had to make a change in 92-93 because we felt we just had no chance to make the playoffs with Roger. Things weren't going well inside the locker room. I love Roger Nielsen. I owe him a lot from my career. He taught me a lot of things, and as a man, I can't say enough good things about him. Unfortunately, he's passed away now, as you would know. But so we got through that season. Ron Smith took over the club after Roger was let go, and we couldn't get out of the hole. And I said to the people that I reported to, I said, we have to get a coach that can handle the caliber players that we have, because we have a lot of star players on this team, and we're going to have somebody that's been used to handling star players. That's a whole different thing than handling, players that are up and coming. It's much different. And so I said, the three coaches that could handle this group would be Al Arbour, Scotty Bowman, or Mike Keenan. I said, Al Arbour's not going to leave the Islanders, and Scotty Bowman's coaching Pittsburgh, and Mike Keenan just got fired by Chicago as GM. I think we should try to get Keenan. And they agreed. And that's when we went out and got Mike Keenan to be the coach.
He was the perfect guy for that team. He drove them hard, bunch of veterans, and obviously the rest is history. But midway through that season, even though you have a really good team, you decide to make some trades at the deadline. March 21st, 1994 is a flurry of activity at the trade deadline for you guys. You trade two of your better players, Tony Amonte and Mike Gartner, which I think shocked a lot of people in the middle of this run. And you got yourselves, as you mentioned, Glenn Anderson, Stefan Matteau comes, Brian Noonan, and ultimately Craig McTavish in another deal. That's a pretty big risk. What made you feel like you had to make those trades in the middle of what would be a very good season nonetheless?
Well, I was really having my hand forced in some ways by Mike Keenan. And I want to clarify something. Mike didn't push for players that he wanted, but he did push for players that he didn't think he could win with, whether that be right or wrong. There are a tremendous number of Mike Gartner fans out there, including myself. And Mike and his family are dear to me, but Mike Keenan didn't feel that way about him. And so sort of at the last minute, I talked to Cliff Fletcher and arranged that trade for Glenn Anderson. And the two of them were at the very least in the playoffs, they were equal at the very least. Some would argue that Anderson, because of his Stanley Cup winning, might have the edge on Mike, who hadn't won. So that's a trade that I made just to change that number, to change from Gartner over to Anderson, and also Anderson fit in with Mess and Kevin Lowe and all those guys again. On the Tony Amonte trade, all season long, Mike Keenan wanted me to trade Tony Amonte for Stefan Matteau. And I said, there's no way I'll do that. Amonte is going to be a star in the league. Mike didn't think so. And I said, Matteau is not enough for Amonte. And this went on all year. And finally I said at the deadline, I was talking to Bob Pulford, and I said, I'm not doing it straight for Matteau. So, I got to get another player. And it worked out to be Noonan. I don't know if I suggested that name or he threw that name at me. I can't really remember that. But then I was convinced to do it. I was and still to this day, and I've told everyone this, I never liked that trade. I like it that we won the cup, and we wouldn't have won without those two guys. But I don't like the trade as a talent scout. And, you never want to give up a guy that's going to go on to become a star, that you think could become a star. And I thought Amonte could become a star. Anyway, on the McTavish trade, I had been talking to Glenn for a long time. They were going to miss the playoffs. It was quite obvious. McTavish was a great, third line checking center, face-off guy, penalty killer. And that year we were real short at center. If you remember back, we were playing Esa Tikkanen at center a lot of the year. And he's not a center naturally; he's a winger. So to get McTavish would really would give us that guy that could shutdown guy. And so after the trades were made, I said, look, and this was even internally and not only externally, we've got to be a better team than we were before the deadline, because at the very least, we've only traded Amonte and Gartner, and we've got Anderson, Matteau, Noonan, and McTavish. And McTavish went for Brad Marchand. I'm saying that wrong, I think, because of the Brad Marchand that's in Boston. Todd Marchand. Todd Marchand was for McTavish. Todd Marchand went on to play many, many years in the league and was really good as a small centerman who could really fly. And so we lost him as a prospect, and we lost Monty as a future star. But when you're talking about just the Stanley Cup in '94, we were adding 4 regular players to the lineup that could play and really fortify us in adding Anderson, McTavish, Noonan, and Matto.
So that must have been hard for you then. If you don't want to make a deal, you see a future of these players that you think is valuable, and yet your coach is coming to you and saying, he's hammering you, no, we got to trade this guy. I can't win with this guy. That's got to create quite an underlying friction throughout that whole season between you and Mike.
Yeah, because I'm supposedly his boss, and you can't really come in and tell me who I've got to trade and this and that. But at the same time, I've always believed that with a coach, you better take away their excuses, because if you don't, then they're going to have them when they get knocked out or the season ends. They're going to say, well, I told you that we weren't going to go anywhere with him, or I told you that it was anywhere with that guy. So I thought by doing those trades at the deadline, I was taking away all the excuses that we could have for not winning. And the other thing was, I knew if obviously if we won, no matter what I did, you're you're in a ticker tape parade. But if we didn't win, I knew I like New York is unforgiving, right? So you're going to be in trouble if you don't win because of the Amante trade. They're going to be in trouble probably because of the Gartner trade, because there's a lot of Mike Gartner fans. But if I hadn't made the trades and we hadn't won, I would have been in trouble again, because then they would have said, well, you didn't do anything. You didn't try. You didn't move anybody. So I just, was convinced that I had to do what I had to do. And the results would be what they are, meaning with my own job and my own career. And that, what, if I want to really be in New York, I better swing for the fences, like they say. So that's what I tried to do.
Wow. That's amazing. You guys get to the postseason and you have 2 early round series wins, as you had mentioned earlier, the Islanders, the Capitals, and that brings on the hated Devils. I mean, it was like all these karmic occurrences had to come and crash down in the 94 playoffs. You had to exercise all of the ghosts. And here's the Devils, and the Devils lead 3-2. You guys are going to the Meadowlands, and Mark Messier guarantees a victory to push it back to a Game 7 at MSG. When Mess says this, it gets splashed on the back of the newspapers, sports talk radio, WFAN's going crazy talking about it. When Mess guarantees the win, are you like, oh, no, don't do that? Or is this exciting because you're saying, all right, my leader, my guy, he believes we're going to do it?
That's what it was. It was the second one. I was like, I got no control as the GM of what's going to happen, right? None, zero in that situation. So when Mess said that, I was just like, oh God, I hope he's right. I just want him to be right. And the pressure wasn't on me again, because there's nothing I can do at that point. I'm sitting back and watching what I built, and things will happen. When Mess said that, you're right. You've described it in a really good way. You're saying, like, my best player, my leader, the franchise at that time is saying that we're going to win. It makes you feel good. Okay, great. I please be right. And as it was, I mean, that performance that he put on in Game 6 is historic. I mean, I said after the game, I mean, this is like the New York Jets and Muhammad Ali and different, or Reggie Jackson in '77. I mean, it was just an incredible athletic feat under immense pressure.
29 years later, I still get chills thinking about it and talking about it. When you go to the Garden and they play this on the Jumbotron, or you ever see a clip of it, I mean, everybody just goes absolutely crazy. He delivers a hat trick when he guarantees a win on the road. And you guys had trailed early 2-goal deficit to the Devils. And in the third period, he leads the Rangers to the victory. What is the feeling like when he delivers that and you leave game 6? Does it feel like, well, we got game 7 because I just witnessed one of the great performances ever?
Yeah, I can't remember what I thought about game 7. I was just giddy about what I'd seen. When he threw the puck down into the empty net for his third goal, after saying that we're going to win, and then going out and carrying the team on his back like that. I mean, there's no words to really describe it other than I was just trying to say, like, this is like Joe Namath with the New York Jets. I mean, this is like one of those historical moments in sports history, and all of sports, not New York only, but all of sports history, where someone says something. I mean, I think of when I was a lot younger and Reggie Jackson hit those 3 home runs off 3 different pitchers at Yankee Stadium on the first pitch from each pitcher. And like, I'm thinking to myself, like, how does that feel to be that guy, like, that does that in Yankees? I still get the chills thinking about that. And I'm sure that for people that are out there, they're thinking the same thing about Mess. I mean, it's really in the biggest game on the biggest stage, he's able to perform like that.
It's one of the great sports moments in New York sports history. It's one of the great moments and performances in hockey history. It's one of the great guarantee big moments in any sport. So it's just an incredible thing to look back on. That leads you to game number 7, which of course has to be another dogfight, which of course is back and forth with the Devils. And ultimately, Matteau, and you guys are going to the Cup Finals. Take me back to that moment and that game, and ultimately watching Stéphane Matteau score.
Well, first of all, I'll say that the Brian Leetch spinorama goal early in the game, where he sort of spun around and scored, that was incredible. And then the game goes 1-0 the whole game, and you've only got this minute 7 or something to get through, and then Zelepukin puts the one in from the side, and I almost fainted, and literally fainted, literally. You just couldn't believe that could happen. And then, of course, into the second overtime period, and that's down at the far end from where I am, that happens. So all I see is, him behind the net, like a lot of people, and then try to center it out to Tikkanen, who was in the crease at that moment, and it hits the paddle of Brodeur's stick and goes back behind his legs. And then it's just, euphoria. And I mean, it's just euphoric. That's all I know is that, and Matteau had scored another big overtime goal in the Meadowlands. If you remember, was that game 3 or game 4?
Yeah,
one or the other.
Yeah.
And so, no, you're just, I mean, as I said, you don't have control. You're sitting there like everybody else. And you just, you're either going to, it's going to be heaven or hell, when whatever scores, but luckily it was heaven.
It puts you in the Stanley Cup final against the Vancouver Canucks, and you're on the doorstep of history, up 3-1, Madison Square Garden, game 5, and the whole city is ready for a championship and a championship night and a championship parade. And not quite. Got to go back to Vancouver, and not quite. So back for a game 7 against the Canucks. What's the heart rate like when you've got 3 chances to win a Stanley Cup?
What I do and what I've always done is found ways to convince myself it's going to be okay. Saying, like, first of all, when we went up 3-1, I was like, we're going to win the Stanley Cup. I can't believe this. We're going to win the Stanley Cup. We're up 3-1, and nobody comes back from down 3-1. It never happens. And then, we sort of, there was such a buzz in New York about, game 5, and everybody thinking this is it. I think that seeped into everybody. Vancouver took advantage of it, played a good game, beat us. And then we go back there, and then they win again. And now you're really scared. I mean, I am. I'm like, again, I have no control. But one thing that turns out to be very fortuitous again is the fact that we had 2 days off between game 6 and game 7. So we had the older team, and whoever was banged up a little bit, and lots of guys are banged up in the playoffs, had an extra day to get ready. And I think that really helped. I'm not saying we would have lost had we had only one day, but I think it was really helpful to have the extra day.
You mentioned euphoria after Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals when that final horn sounds and bedlam erupts inside the Garden after Game 7. What are your emotions like?
I had asked the head of security for us, and I should remember his name because he's a great guy and he's gone now. I said, with 5 minutes to go, if we're ahead, please come and get me and bring me down to where my mother and my wife were sitting, and which was like 5 rows behind the bench. And so he came and got me, and I went up there and I was with them. And when I got up there, I don't know how many minutes were left, but then we had to go through that icing call. And which, I've watched that several times since then on video, and like that was a really bad call. That was icing for sure, because Bure let up on it. But in any case, we get back there for the face-off with, what was it, 0.4 to go or something like that.
Yeah.
And my wife is crying, because she can't take the tension. And I just kept saying to her, which I was really saying this to myself, but I was saying it to her, they never score in this situation. It never happens. It never happens. It never happens. I just kept saying that over and over again, mostly to convince myself that it'd be okay. And then, of course, the buzzer went, and then it's crazy. It's hard to describe how it feels because it goes so quickly. Then everything's on hyper speed at that point, from what you do with the cup on the ice and all the rest of it. It was just, amazing.
A couple of days later, you have the Stanley Cup Parade. First of all, I mean, the Garden is absolutely on fire. There's the sign, "Now I can die in peace," which really summarized how most Rangers fans felt at that time. Legions, generations of Rangers fans that never thought they'd see the day in their lifetime. You do it at the Garden. A couple of days later, bright, beautiful June sunshine. You have the parade, ticker tape down the Canyon of Heroes. It all seemed so perfect. It all seemed like if it was going to happen, it had to happen like this. All of the rivalries and all of the close games and all of the comebacks and how you guys won. And then, the day of glory. And then you just own the city, because the Knicks did not close out the championship that year. They would lose in Game 7. And so that summer, it's just a Ranger city through and through. And those guys are just heroes. What is it like to have the crown on your head in the biggest city in America?
That's one that that's hard to describe, because I was also in the midst of all that stuff with Keenan, how he'd been talking to the Red Wings during the finals, and he had then subsequently signed with St. Louis on July, I forget whether it was June 1st or July 1st or whenever, announced that he was calling for a breach in his contract. So I was going through all that, then getting ready for the draft, or having just had the draft. I don't know which way it was. There was a lot of business to be done in the summers. We're not like the players that completely get their time off, until the next training camp.
And go party with the cup and swim in pools with the cup and drink beer out of the cup and things like this.
Yeah. And take it to their hometown and do all that stuff. I mean, we have work to be done. So, and they were selling the team, the Garden at the time. It was being sold from Paramount to Viacom. And of course, you're all involved in that because there's a bit of a dog and pony show when the prospective buyers come through and they want to talk to you about your part of the business and this and that. So, I mean, naturally it was, it was amazing, but it wasn't as mythical as it might seem. It was for me, because as I said, there was work to be done. And at that time, you didn't know that it would take, that it would go 29 years up to this point. You were hoping to win it again in 95. That was, and then we had the lockout coming up, and There was a lot of different stuff. So, I mean, yes. Did you enjoy it? Of course. Did you enjoy being the top dog in the league and in the city? Yeah, I remember it being great. I don't remember much more than that because there really wasn't time to go around and have people buy you dinner and that.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting point. The honeymoon was short-lived, even from a fan standpoint, because of the Mike Keenan thing. I mean, rarely do you have a head coach come in and just sit for one season, and in that season win a championship, and then he's gone a month later. Did that for you feel like he was a bit of a traitor? Did it feel like he was a backstabber? I mean, emotionally, that must have been really difficult, although you guys did have your run-in, so maybe your life was a little bit easier without Mike.
Yeah, I mean, Mike is such a different bird. I mean, if that had been Colin Campbell that had done that, I would have really been hurt. If that had been Roger Nielsen that had done that. But Mike Keenan was only out for Mike Keenan. And so, for him, he wanted to go be GM someplace and get more money and, be a bigger. And so that's why I was working on Detroit during the finals. And that's why he ended up going to St. Louis as GM coach. There wasn't really at that time in his life, and I don't know what he's like now, but there wasn't at that time any feeling of, I want to stay here and be the guy that won the cup for the Rangers and stay with them as long as I can. It was more of, I got to use this to jump to the next rung up on the ladder. And for me, from 1989 on, I only wanted to be with the Rangers. And to this day, I can tell you that honestly. I mean, here I am 23 years later after leaving the Rangers. I never would have left the Rangers ever. Until this day, I wouldn't have left the Rangers. But that's the way it goes, and they make their decisions. And but to leave the Rangers voluntarily like that to go to another team, I mean, to me, it's like you're working for Mercedes, and then you get a chance to go and be with Lada, and so you go with Lada. Remember the Russian car maker Lada, or Citroen or something. I mean, you're working on the Mercedes S line, and you're taking a job with Citroen because it pays you a little bit more money. Like, to me, you get the chance to be with the Rangers, you wouldn't leave there voluntarily.
Were the players angry?
No, I don't think so. I think the players were okay. I mean, again, we had that reunion not too long ago. 25 years. And I had a lot of comments from the players that things just haven't changed. I mean, it was all the same. All the personalities were the same.
Yeah.
And personalities usually don't change, as in your life. I mean, people are what they are. And you know what? Without him, we probably wouldn't have won because he knew how to push buttons that needed to be pushed. And at the end of the day, he was the head coach of the Stanley Cup team. He got to get all the credit possible for that. I mean, no matter how he did it, you can't take that away from him.
2 years later, Wayne Gretzky comes about. He's a free agent. He actually has a bigger deal to stay with St. Louis, but he decides on less money, a 2-year deal, to come to New York, play with Mark Messier. Had you circled Wayne Gretzky as a guy that you wanted to sign, or did he reach out to you? Did Messier say, hey, you should look at Wayne? How does that come about?
No, that came about because when LA was going to trade him, if you remember, they traded him at the deadline or thereabouts the year before to St. Louis. And I was involved slightly with that. And then I kept on Mike Barnett, who was his agent, about, in the summer, give us a chance. You're not supposed to do that stuff, but I was doing it. Give us a chance. And so then that summer came. And again, I mean, the truth of the matter is that Wayne didn't go back to St. Louis because guess who the coach was? Okay, so he left St. Louis, didn't want to be in St. Louis because he didn't want to deal with that. So then he, picked his place to go of the teams that were willing to pay him. And, we were able to get him to come there. I think it was a combination of the fact that it is New York, along with playing with Mark again. So I think that there was, two big reasons for him to come to the biggest stage in the world and play with one of his buddies that he'd won all these cups with.
And you make a run to the Eastern Conference Finals in '97, ultimately lose to the Philadelphia Flyers, and feels like that combination of Mess and Gretzky, even at the very end of their careers, it feels like, this is a really good bond that they have. And yet Messier decides to leave himself for Vancouver. And so what did that do for you? Did you see that coming? Did you guys have conversations about that?
No. What happened was, the ownership at that time was ITT, and you have to clear things by the owners when you do things. And Messier's contract was up. They said to me, "Well, you can't give him more than you give Gretzky. Gretzky's better than him right now, or just as good." And points wise, they were right. And I said, "Well, but he's the leader of the team, and we can't let him go." And they were pretty adamant about not paying more than what I offered him. We ended up negotiating at a little bit higher, but he was mad at us. And see, there's always a little known story behind everything that happens. And this little known story was that the owner there, McCaw, his name was McCaw, had tried to sign Gretzky the summer we signed him, which was, the summer before. And Gretzky came to us. And so he told Pat Quinn, and Pat Quinn told me this later, that he said, "I don't care what it is, you sign Messier." And I don't know if Pat Quinn wanted to or not, but he had no choice. So they signed Messier to that humongous deal that he got. And, we weren't even in the same ballpark with that deal. And so it was tough on me, because not only did I like Mark and obviously feel a lot of gratitude for what he had done for the franchise, but it also was, I was now positioned even by him as the bad guy, as the guy that, which wasn't really true, but what can I do? I can't throw the owners under the bus. I've sort of got to take the heat, but it wasn't my decision to let him go. Some people will say, some fans who don't read deep into this stuff, you let Messier go. Well, no, I didn't let him go. He decided to go to Vancouver because there was more money there. He could have signed with the Rangers, but it wasn't as rich a deal as he was going to get with Vancouver. So that was hurtful at the time, because again, it all was forgotten at that time about the fact that I traded for him, and that, I'd done all these other good moves, and now you're a village idiot because you let him go. In fact, the back of the Post said "Dumb and Dumber" about me and Checkets.
Did you feel like it was the fans and media that didn't understand the byproduct or the context, or also ownership? Did ownership bite back at you? Like, how could you let him go?
No, ownership was fine with him leaving, because they're the ones that set the price. But I thought that the writers, and some of the writers and the fans, therefore, and remember, there's no social media, there's no internet per se, they didn't understand. And so here's the problem with, as a GM, of having an iconic player play for you near the end of his career. In the sports business, we sell love of the players to the fans. So we say, love our players, buy our tickets, buy our merchandise, love our players, come cheer for our players. Then we get into a dispute with one of the most beloved players. Well, do you think that we have no chance with the media, with the public, because of course they're going to side with the beloved guy that we sold them the addiction to, So I became the bad guy, which goes with the territory, because Mess was Mess. And I mean, nobody wanted to see him leave. And you got to find a reason for why he left. Well, there's the reason. It's that guy. He didn't get him. He didn't sign him. He didn't get it done. And that goes, as I said, that goes with the territory. It's one of the tough parts of being in charge, and you got to suck it up and go along with it. But that inside, it hurts, because you're not, nobody likes to be criticized like that.
And Messier, if I'm not mistaken, never makes a postseason, even in Vancouver, with that contract. Have you ever spoken to him, and does he regret signing that deal and leaving Camelot?
Well, we haven't spoken so much about that per se like that. He got bought out of the last 2 years of it too. So he played, I think, in Vancouver for 4 years. I think I'd have to look it up. Came back to the Rangers when I was gone. They did that as a, they did that publicity thing with Bury the Hatchet and all this stuff. Mess and I are friends. I'll talk to him when I see him. We're like, I don't think there's any thought of resentment on his part at all, and there's certainly none on mine, because all we think about is what we did together in '94. But I did write him a note not too long ago, because I was doing a collection of photographs in my office, and I wanted him to sign something. He said, "Yeah, sure. Here, send it to this address." And I put a note in there, sort of apologizing for '97 and saying, I wish that never would have happened, and I probably should have pushed harder with the owners. I didn't, and I was wrong, and I wish I had have, and I'm sorry that shit ever happened. Because I am sorry that it ever happened. It would have been a much better storybook story if he would have stayed in New York. But, things happen.
Wow, that's a really interesting backstory. I don't think a lot of Rangers fans would understand that kind of context.
The first time I've ever told that I wrote that note is right now. I've never told anyone that.
When you guys got back together for the '94 reunion a couple of years ago, did it feel like all of that turmoil, the Messier stuff, the Keenan stuff, all that had kind of been buried? Or, as you said before, things didn't change much? All that stuff kind of still simmers?
Yeah, Mark is such a pro. Like, he was out on he did the sort of the MC job on the ice, and he was very complimentary about everybody. I don't, including me, things that he said. And then when we got together, he was, I'm using this word not in a weird way, but he was a loving guy. Like, we were all loving to each other at that event, because we love each other, like that we did this great thing together. And he was great. And I can honestly say that I think if I saw him right now, I mean, we'd have a great time, laughing and about things. I send him things from time to time in text or that. And so it's like it's water under the bridge and it's gone. However, you're asking somebody, this is the way I felt. Okay, so I'm going to send you a photo of you with the Stanley Cup on the Rangers. I want to make sure that I, say to you, I'm not just asking you to sign a picture of the Rangers and, oh, by the way, yeah, I'm the one that got rid of you. Like, I wasn't the guy that got rid of him. And I want him to make sure he knew that, because I felt I would feel very disingenuous if I had been that, asking him to write a note and sign a photograph for my office. So I want to make sure he knew that, like, yeah, I blame myself I'm hard on myself. And I said, I should have tried harder. I should have pushed harder. I should have done things differently. I should have pushed back on the owners. I don't know what it would have cost me to do that. But I didn't, and I'm sorry. And I'm sorry that thing ever happened, which I am. I'm very sorry that ever happened. But again, there's only so much you can control in life.
You don't end up being a full-time GM for another team in the NHL, but you do have a short stint, about 6 weeks with the Islanders. And I'm wondering, after you left the Rangers, you had made that comment, once you work for Mercedes-Benz, you don't want to go work for so-and-so. Is that how you felt when you left the Rangers? Like, no other NHL job is going to match this, so it's not really of my interest?
Well, there would be. No, that's not the way I felt. However, there would be no other job that I could get that could ever match the experience I had in New York. I don't care, nothing now. Because even if I was to go home to Toronto and win it in Toronto, Toronto's not New York, even though Toronto's more of a hockey town, obviously, and it would be like the Yankees having not won it since 1967, and then you ran the Yankees to win it. But that in New York was, there's no way you could get as high a high as that was. You couldn't. It's not possible. You could win 5 in Colorado, and I'm only picking out Colorado. Pick any town. and it's not the same as that one was in New York. I mean, it was just off the charts. And so I would have liked to have been GM again. I did apply for the Toronto job in 2006, and I was runner up to John Ferguson Jr. I think there's people that think that maybe that might have not been the right decision on their part. But anyway, and then I did go to the Islanders, and that was a very bad fit at that time. And it ended quickly because I just couldn't do it the way the owner wanted me to do it. It was just, I couldn't do it. I'd rather not work than do that.
And he wanted basically a board of advisors to be able to pitch into the decisions, not allow it to be your decision.
Yeah, he didn't want anything traditional. So nothing traditional. Wanted to do everything different. And therefore you're going to have a committee, and you're going to, there's going to be a lot of people having a hand in the decisions. And I'm like, well, it won't work. That doesn't work anywhere. You got to have one leader, and if that's what you hired me to do, and now if you don't want me to do that, then I'm out. So
83 years. We all dream about doing something great in our lives and setting ourselves up for something special. We did something very special. 83 years of Rangers hockey, and you are the only person to have built a Stanley Cup champion. How does that feel?
It feels fantastic. I mean, I'm very proud of it. I know that it wasn't just me, of course. It wasn't. There's no way it was. And the first applause should go to the players, always, first and foremost, always. But I'm very proud of the fact that I could, in 5 years, take the Rangers from where they were when Phil Esposito was let go in May of '89 to only 5 years later, win the Stanley Cup in New York. It was something that people thought they would never see in their lifetime. And so that is an amazing feeling. And if it ends this year, meaning if there's one this year for New York, or it ends in 10 years from now, I don't think there'll ever be one like that one.
It's really interesting that you say that, because I just had a conversation today before you and I spoke with a buddy of mine who is a season ticket holder to the Rangers. He loves them dearly. And I said, if they won a Stanley Cup this year, how would it feel? And he goes, it would be great, but I don't think anything will ever feel like 94 did, for all the reasons you and I just talked about over 45 minutes. And I think you're right. There's just something that's always going to be so magical about 94 that I don't know if you can ever match, no matter what ends up happening.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of surprised that they haven't made a movie out of 94, because if you think about all the interesting twists and turns it took, one of the best hockey movie I've ever seen is Miracle, in my opinion, other than Slapshot, of course, but Miracle. And when you go through that movie and see all the twists and turns that Herb Brooks went through and those players went through, it's fascinating that they ended up winning. Now that's the story of the David and Goliath type story. Okay. Ours isn't a story of David and Goliath, but just the things that you've been talking to me about during this time. There were so many twists and turns, and we haven't even talked about the luck that I had in getting some of the players. For example, we go to training camp, and at training camp, I get a call from Pierre Paget, who says, would you trade Mike Hurlbut? And I said, yes. And he says, we need a guy on the power play, a point man on the power play. Mike is good in Binghamton on the point on the power play. I said, who would you give me for him? And he says, I'll give you a list of prospects that we have. And in that list, I send it over to my Swedish European scout, Christer Rockstrom. And he says, take this guy. And the guy's name was Alexander Karpatsev. Karpatsev flies over and is one of our top 6 defensemen.
Mm-hmm.
Doug Lidster, who was on the ice when we won the cup against Vancouver, the team that he played for so long with. At the expansion draft before the Tampa Bay Ottawa expansion draft, you could only protect one goalie, so it had to be either Richter or Van Beesbroek. And I didn't want to get nothing for Van Beesbroek. Roger Nielsen had been hired as the coach of Florida. They were going to take him first overall. So I called Pat Quinn and I had to convince him, but we ended up working out this deal where I traded him to him so that he wouldn't lose Ron Tugnut, who was the backup to Kirk McLean, because they thought they had a great 1-2 mix there. And I said, you're going to lose him. Florida will take him first. And he says, he says, what do I give you if what do I have to give you for him? And I just literally picked up the reserve list and exposed list from Vancouver and said, give me Doug Lidster, who they were exposing in the expansion draft. Doug Lidster comes in, and I just said it. He was on the ice when we won the Stanley Cup against Vancouver that same season. There's 2 top 6 defensemen. They didn't fall in my lap, but I mean, that's fortuitous to end up with those 2 guys. You have Sergei Zubov as a rookie leading the team in scoring. I couldn't have told you that he was going to be that good that year, and be a big part of why we won the cup in the playoffs. The famous pass he gave over to Brian Leach for the 1-0 lead in Game 7. And there were other things. There were so many things. So back to what I was saying, I'm surprised somebody hasn't come up and tried to make a movie out of it, because there are just so many twists and turns to breaking this 54-year jinx that ends up being now 83. I mean, that's an even bigger story than, if you think about it, the U.S. had won the gold medal in 1961, was it, or 1960? They had won the hockey gold medal. So that was 20 years later. I mean, we're talking, decades and decades later. And with all the characters that it would be in this movie, from the Mike Keenans of the thing to the trainers to everybody. So anyway, it was the year of my life, a fantastic year of everybody's life. You'd never trade it for, well, anyway, you wouldn't, it was fantastic. And it was a great thing to be proud of. And I'm very proud of the players. When we went and had that anniversary, I can honestly tell you that you felt that these guys just loved each other. They loved, everybody in the room loved each other. Like they were just like, it was the greatest thing to see each other again and to be back together at a point where there was no boss. I wasn't the boss. Keenan wasn't the coach anymore. The players, there wasn't a first line center in the room. It was just, you were all equal because your careers are all over. And it was just unbelievable feeling.
You deserved a little bit of fortuitous bounces dealing with Keenan all those years. So that just evened itself out, I think, a little bit. Neil Smith is the architect of still the last and only Stanley Cup champ for the Rangers since 1940. A very successful executive in the NHL, successful broadcaster as well, and kind enough to spend this much time with us here on the show. Neil, this was more than I could have ever asked for. I really, really appreciate all the stories, the context, the anecdotes, the opinions. That was really special. Thanks so much for sharing that with us.
Oh, you're more than welcome. And maybe I can come on down the road.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoy New York Accent, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more episodes like this one. Also, if you want to watch more episodes of New York Accent, check out our playlist and let us know what you think in the comments below. And don't forget to follow us on social media, @DA on CBS on Twitter, @Damon Amendo on Instagram, to stay up to date on our latest episodes when we release a new episode. And other links are in the description below. Thanks again for watching, and we will see you for the next episode of New York Accent.